Hi, welcome to the Restoration Activation Project video commentary series. I'm Marianne and I'm very happy to have you with me today. In this video, I'm going to be looking at um, one of the most widespread transgressions that humans as a collective are committing, if you will, that go against the higher order conditions and creational principles of our reality. And these transgressions keep us regressed. And the one I'm going to delve into today, and by the way, I did my earlier video, I covered 7 of these, 7 ways humans keep themselves from progressing in consciousness. And the one I'm going to look into today is around sexuality and human behaviors around sex and kind of how we got where we are today, and perhaps some potential ways that we can move through this in a consciousness progressive way. But before I get into those, I have a couple of really important addendums to make to my last commentary. And I want to make them because not only do they tie into the last commentary, but they're very relevant to what I'm going to be talking about today. And these 3 notes are, first of all, in the last commentary, which was around the different ways we can be interfered with, I spoke to hosting and organic portals. And that means that's when somebody the mind-body complex is being used by another consciousness, another entity or being, to carry out their agenda rather than the mind-body complex that they're occupying's agenda. Okay? And first of all, it's really important to acknowledge that we've all been victimized in this way, because we all have distortions, these hooks that enable these beings to make us hosts, the way they can hook into us. The distortions provide those little mechanisms, the grunge that they latch onto, that enable them to mess with our excuse me, thoughts and our emotions, and actually use the body, the mind-body complex, to function through on occasion, and in some cases on a full-time basis, otherwise known as possession or entity attachment. It can be part-time or full-time. Okay? Now, we've all been victimized in this way because we all have distortions. And it's one thing to accept and acknowledge and own that. But we also have to look at the flip side. Not only have we been on the receiving end of someone else who was hosted, we have been hosted, and we have been the victimizer, whether in this lifetime or in other versions of ourselves, in other realities and dimensions and so forth. We have to own that as well. That is the ultimate shadow work, is to accept that, to know that about ourselves, because that's part of understanding what we really are, what core self really is, what whole self really means. That there are all these different versions of ourselves, and we've been poor, innocent, defenseless victim. And we've been the boogeyman. Yes, we have. And we have to own that as well. And as important as it is to acknowledge that we've been on both sides of the fence, it's very important to acknowledge that we have been victimized. But to not take either a holier than thou attitude that it's only been done to us, and neglecting the fact that we have at some point in some version of ourselves done it to others, but to also, in acknowledging that we have been victimized, to not take on victim consciousness. Neither the I've only been a victim, I've never been a victimizer, or in acknowledging that we've been victimized, to be in victim consciousness, in victim mode. Because all you're doing in doing that is prolonging. There's something in you that is, it's a distortion that needs to be cleared, bottom line. So no victim mentality. We're all victims and we're all victimizers. And that's part of the journey of the conscious journey of awakening, is understanding that and taking in and working through those shadow aspects of ourselves, not just now in this reality, in this lifetime, but in the greater whole or sense of ourselves. Okay? The second point I want to make that ties into both the last commentary and the commentary today is genetic manipulation. I talk about that a lot. I'll be talking about that a lot because it's a big topic and it's very important. The genetic manipulation, both at the physical level through DNA and at the energetic human template level. And talking just a little bit about what that means. And because I know a number of you that maybe you've heard about it for some time, but you're now kind of fully coming to grasp and get your mind around and, trying to come to grips with that, but without feeling helpless in that. In other words, without falling into the, oh my God, these beings are tampering with me, have tampered with me in ways I don't know how. How could I possibly protect myself to not just be a victim to that and keep moving through that? Am I totally helpless in that? This comes up a lot. And no, you're not. And here's why. Consider for a moment, and a lot of what I speak through, which core self and this mind-body complex, the original, and our original capacities involve a lot of not just tapping into inner knowing, but tapping into inner knowing and your own capacities for logic. And part of logic is what us old folks used to call common sense. Common sense. Which isn't very common these days, unfortunately. And those are capacities that used to be fairly prevalent, even in modern times. But when you look around today, even common sense is absent so many times in so many ways. So a lot of what I speak through is also common sense in conjunction with inner knowing, direct knowing experience. All right? So let's talk about some common sense here. Yes, these beings tampered with, do still tamper with, um, our genetics, both physically and energetically. Okay? But, now think about this. If that was all it took to keep humans regressed and continually in a regressive mode, then why do they do all these other things? Why do they work so diligently? And we do it to ourselves now a lot. We do a lot of their work for them because these programs have been in place for so long. And yes, they're constantly tweaking them and upgrading them and so forth. And you can, bringing in things like artificial intelligence and such to keep pushing the programs and expanding them. But why would they need to do this if genetic manipulation was the be-all, end-all in controlling us on multiple levels for multiple reasons? Now think about that. If genetic manipulation were a set it and forget it kind of program, then why do they do all these other things? And they keep ramping them up. They keep on ramping them up. Common sense tells me that genetics alone aren't enough. Genetic manipulation alone doesn't do it. Doesn't accomplish their goals. They have to constantly work at us, work on us in these other ways. Minds, emotions, energies, all of that. Genetics alone don't cut it. Okay? So, that also tells me that it is our minds, our thoughts, and our emotions, and our physical energies, the mind center, the heart center, the creational center energies, directly impact genetics, our own genetics. We have a distinct say-so over our genetics through our energies, the energies of thought and emotion. These energies deeply impact genetics. And in fact, oftentimes these various programs that they use, the social conditioning and engineering programs that they use, non-genetic directly, that they use to elicit certain thoughts and emotions from us, they're doing that because they do affect our genetics. It isn't all about physical manipulation of DNA or energetic genetics. It's through energies, by and large, that genetics change and shift and can be basically mastered. So, put that in your pipe and smoke it. We have a distinct say-so in the nature of our own genetics, the makeup of our genetics. And part of the work that I do with clients is showing them exactly how they can directly impact and build, rebuild, reconnect with our original full human genetics. So, those of you who may be new to this aspect of knowledge about our reality, the truth of our reality, don't be intimidated by knowledge. Never be intimidated by knowledge anyway. Knowledge is just information. And choose your responses to it carefully. what you take from it or don't take from it. And remember, step outside of yourself to observe the information, whether you're viewing it in a video, in a movie, reading a book, an article, it doesn't matter. Be conscious. Consciously step outside yourself without any attachment whatsoever to the information. Then just pay attention to how you respond to it. Make note of that, the energies that might be being drawn forth, whether positive or negative. And I hate a lot of the terminology. Don't hate. Don't like. Strongly dislike some of the terminologies that we use. I'll be really glad at some point when we get back into telepathy on a full-time basis, because language intentionally is very restrictive, very limiting, and that's why I choose my terminology very carefully. And in an earlier video, I addressed that topic and why I choose my words carefully and so forth, and you might want to look at that video too. Okay? So, don't be intimidated by the knowledge that we have been, and they still continually work to modify our genetics. Okay? The third point that I want to make before I get into today's topic, that ties both into the last commentary and today's, is the topic of addictions. Addictions are nothing more or less than the most powerful, most destructive distortions that we carry. They are rooted in very deep-seated ego attachments and identifications. And they provide the most, or some of the biggest, most easily accessible hooks to the entities who wish to interfere with our core self, with the transduction of core self, higher order energies and capacities, and consciousness. Okay? Addictions. And it doesn't matter, and there are all kinds of addictions. And it doesn't matter what kind of addiction. Any addiction makes us susceptible. However, or susceptible, did I say that right? Okay. You can be addicted to anything, okay? You can become addicted to anything. But there are those addictions that are more self-destructive than others. And a few of those are addictions to drugs, whether they be pharmaceuticals, big pharma stuff, street stuff, medicinal drugs, ayahuasca, mushrooms, all of that. Because even those and the practices around them, the plants themselves have been tampered with. And those make us highly susceptible. In fact, many of those drugs, and particularly the medicinal plants, that's the whole purpose, to open consciousness, open our energies, making us just that more accessible to various entities that are just waiting for the chance. And maybe they didn't have any other opportunity with you until you tried or began using medicinal plants. Now, there are still people usually referred to as shamans, that can help you use these plants, drugs responsibly. However, as with most beneficial technologies, and I'm going to do a whole video on this, probably after this one, however beneficial a technology or, excuse me, an idea, however beneficial it can be, or was intended from its inception and its creation to be, it can be just as easily turned to something that causes harm. That's the way consciousness works. So that's a fact of consciousness reality. That's why it is so important that we become self-responsible. We have to know all of these things in order to be self-responsible. We have to understand these principles of creation, the principles that govern the do no harm, taking full self-responsibility, and function through those. Because it's because humans have not done that, that even some of their most incomprehensible to us at this point, technologically advanced, and I'm talking about technology sourced in pure potential and vital energy, real technology, not the stuff that we're sold as being real technology today, excuse me, such as quantum technologies, nanotechnologies related to that, mechanical technologies. I'm talking about real technologies that, because even when they were, if they were created and implemented from a place of, from consciousness, progressive consciousness, with the highest, most core self-aligned intentions, that when the creators turned their backs on those technologies, it's what enabled the beings and races and civilizations that came in after were able to turn them to something else to serve their consciousness regressive agendas. So total responsibility for your creations, your thoughts, your emotions, what you bring into the world, knowing that you are responsible for the consequences, and not turning this over to anyone else ever, because one way or the other, the universe, the consciousness itself is going to balance itself. So when we do make a mess, it's up to us to clean it up. All right? So addictions. And there's all sorts of addictions. Drugs, as I just talked about, alcohol, food, and sex. Sex-related addictions. Those are 4 of the biggest hitters. And of course, any other type of addiction leaves us susceptible as well. That could be addictions to work. You're a workaholic. The sole thing that drives you, money. You're addicted to money for the sake of money and things and materialism. These are all extreme forms of ego attachments and identifications at some level. All right? So that brings us into today's topic, which is around human sexuality and the current state of human sexuality, as well as how we got here. All right? Now, not exactly front page news, because you all know it if you have half an eye open to what's going on in the world, as to how the ways in which human sexuality has been utterly, how they at every moment work, the entities pulling the strings constantly work to debase us in that manner through sexuality. Predatory sex, sex for sport, and there's even applications. You may or may not have heard of one called Tinder, and it's all about just hooking up online for the purpose of meeting someone to have sex, some form of sex. Some sexual act will be performed. You don't know this person, never going to see him again. If that's not debasement of humanity and human sensibilities, then I don't know what is. Take a look at pornography. In these near end of cycle times, major cosmic and energetic cycles coming to an end. The powers that folks and energies and entities both on and off world pulling the strings right now are in a frenzied attempt to really amp up all of their programs. And those programs are always revolve around regressing us consciously, keeping us suppressed, and or regressing us further, which explains most everything that's going on around us. The extremities of behavior now, the seemingly collective loss of compassion, true love, real love, understanding of what's going on. People are so caught up in this programming and in the engineering that has gone on. And many of them, you've got the people that are really focused on money and spending and physical satiation and pleasure, the pleasure principle, and I'll get into that probably in an article, but just totally immersed in physical pleasure, satiating, drowning in physical pleasures, although they're never satisfied. They haven't figured that out, that never fills them. So it's never enough. It's this constant, this cycle over and over. They're caught in this hamster wheel of seeking pleasure. Okay? So there's that level of manipulation going on. Another level, those who are just struggling in this, I'm in the USA, struggling, not just around the world, but right here in this country, can barely make ends meet. You've got two parents or just a two-person, partnership household, and both have to work, just to make ends meet. Oftentimes, both having more than one job. Keeping them so immersed in survival mode, they don't even have a chance to think about some of these other things much less being able to consider even those that are on a conscious journey of awakening, that are caught up in those kinds of circumstances. It's to say that that's really hard is a gross understatement. So we've got that going on. But at both those levels and all these other levels of manipulation, these programs that are going on, sex is kind of a common thread through all of that. And for example, Mr. and Mrs. working couple or partnership, even if they're not married, sex for them might be very seldom, but when it is, it's purely a physical release. Maybe a fleeting moment of closeness that they, one or the other, or one, and this is not, let me back up here before I get into this. There is no judgment in any of what I'm speaking to, ever, not just around sexuality, but any other video. This are observations and understandings. No judgment. None. I don't operate from that place. Okay? No judgment. So lock that in right now. This is without judgment. These are observations. It's purely a physical release. There's no higher order, no consciousness involved in it beyond the conscious thought that they want some physical release, pleasure, closeness, whatever. No judgment. But that's how they're functioning. And then we can take it to the next level. Then there is, excuse me, sex for sport. It's just for fun. Feels good. It's something you do, like going to a baseball game, hanging out with the girls or the guys. It is just, and in some cases, people turn it into a competition. And then at another level, we have predatory sex. People that are seeking some form of sexual intercourse, sexual interchange with others as a form of building their self-esteem, their sense of superiority, satiating an egoic desire for conquest. So there's that level. All of these being forms of human debasement. And there are sexual relationships, and I'm going to give you several links below this video that are very important, that involve focused, intentional, long-term planned sexual connections between people. And those doing the planning, the long-term vision, are some of these other races and beings. Okay? And they can stimulate psychic connections, perhaps these people, they meet and they say, you know, I figure out that they're having some of, once they're in a relationship, they come together. Circumstances are manipulated so that these two come together, either psychically, and then they ultimately meet in person, or maybe they meet online, and then they come together and start, through conversation, figure out that they're having some of the identical dreams, some identical dreams, very similar situations or experiences in their lives. And oftentimes they have a deep psychic connection, almost telepathic in some cases. It is telepathic in some cases. Some refer to this as twin flames. That's another whole topic in itself. And ultimately, these connections have been engineered. The two people don't know this, of course. They're not meant to know this. Sometimes they can figure it out with some help, maybe on their own. But most of the time, going into this, people have no clue that that's what's happening to them and around them. And sometimes these connections are based in perhaps past life connections where there was a strong connection. Not always. And always there is some sort of capacity or energy within the two parties that these entities are seeking, and they're seeking to amplify it by bringing these two together and exploit it. Whatever damage it does to the people involved at the time, doesn't matter. And there's a couple of different forms of this. This particular form is, and this term was coined by this wonderful person, Eve, E-V-E Lorgen, Lorgen, and you can go to her site. I'll provide a link. And she refers to it in her writings in her book. It's called The Love Bite. And that's another form of human sexuality exploitation because of the, well, I'll get into that in just a minute. Hold on. The energies. Forgive me. Got ahead of myself. And the other version of that is called the dark side of Cupid. Again, these are Eve Lorgen's terminologies. And the dark side of Cupid isn't based around past life relationships or necessarily psychic abilities, so-called psychic abilities, some of our inherent capacities that are coming or forced to come to the forefront sometimes. They weren't even there, but they become activated and then exploited by these entities. But the dark side of Cupid, and in this case, or in both cases, the sexual connection is at the center of all of the goings on. And for those people that are in these situations that aren't aware at all, I mean, it's sexual vampirism on vampirism on both parties' parts, taking it and getting into that and that explosive energies of sexual gratification and all the energies around that are then they're being exploited by these entities. And these types of goings on are extremely detrimental to the parties involved. Can be extremely damaging for the long term. Not just energetically, but physically. Physical harm. Physical disorders. Because remember, distortions can manifest as, and do manifest as, not just thoughts and actions and behaviors, but physical disorders. Mental, emotional, and physical bodily disorders. And I want to talk a minute now about the energies of sex, and what that really means. If you're of age, and I hope to heck you are, that you're older than 18 watching this, that your parents and you yourself are taking some responsibility. But sexual energy, as it is today, through these current mind-body complexes that we function through, is a lesser form of creational energy. That's truly what it is. It's not just a pleasure pocket. these reproductive organs are just for procreation. And basically the stories that we've been told is that throughout religion and modern medicine, mainstream medicine, that the pleasure and the sensations that we feel around sexual exchange and intercourse is so that humans would be interested in procreating. They wanted to make it it was supposed to be a really pleasurable experience. Well, and now I'm going to get into, remember the 3 notes that I made at the beginning of this, around genetic manipulation and being organic portals, those around us or ourselves, and addictions. Okay, but right now I'm going to touch on the original full human mind-body complex and tie that into genetic manipulation. In my prior video, The Origins of Humans and the Human Template, you need to look at that if you haven't watched that. I talk about how when in our original state, we were 4th density with the capacity to maneuver, work across and from within all densities and dimensions of our solar system, our system, of this planet, because the construct, our solar system, planetary, universal construct, are also multidimensional, multiversioned, just like we are. We were built to work in tandem, to co-create with these systems, within these systems, and all versions, dimensions, and densities of this system. Which means that our original 4th density makeup was not like what we see today. It was a much higher vibrational level so that it could move in and out of densities and realms and dimensions. The vibrational level was so much higher density. But the current body and our current reality, because remember, dimension evolves from density. And as our 4th density capacities and awareness and energies began regressing, so did our baseline dimension, which was 4th dimension. So because of our regression, because we co-create, our dimension comes up around us as a result of what we are creating within it. So did our dimension regress. to third dimension. That is not the original dimension that we were created for and within and all that. Okay? So, and that was a result of genetic manipulation, as well as mind and social conditioning and social engineering, and lack of human irresponsibility, or lack of responsibility. So all those factors coming into play over the course of millennia, we regressed. Okay? So, in our original full human mind-body complex, and this is where I begin my theory, again, based on common sense, connecting deeply with inner self, inner knowing, and do with it what you will. But this is my understanding, that some point after our original higher self creators of these projections in this reality went on to other densities and realities on their consciousness progression journeys. And those that were invited initially to partake of our great success in being able to have evolved ourselves through physicality. Remember, that was the original purpose, the sole purpose of projecting ourselves in this way, this creation, to progress consciousness in tandem, co-create with our physical construct around us, which responds perfectly to all that we create, the energies that we're projecting. It evolves around that, or devolves if we're devolving, regressing. But in our original full human state, and these other races were invited in to partake of our great success in progressing through physicality. And that was why the human template was created, so that other races and beings that were invited in could partake of our makeup, our genetic, energetic makeup, and access this mind-body complex, to live among humans, to learn from us with access to these other things, so that they could keep progressing their own races and civilizations. And that all fell to hell. Because these highly advanced, beyond comprehension at this point, humans, ourselves, these other versions of ourselves, moved on to other things and basically gave up responsibility for us. In a nutshell, we deserted ourselves. We did. These past versions of ourselves moved on to other things because they became so absorbed. They lost sight of what they had learned through this project, if you will, and became a lost sight of true responsibility. So no matter how high the density, the same principles of creation and self-responsibility for all that you create, no matter where you are on your journey, 12 densities and beyond, or third density, we are responsible for our creations. Okay, so now we've left ourselves. We deserted ourselves. We did. And these other beings, millennia are passing. These other beings, they're losing sight. They're seeing. They're really learning about our makeup and how we perform and all. But remember, they were many of them that came after the fact were not invited. And even those that were invited didn't do a good job of being our caretakers, overseers, if you will. They were, and if they weren't when they came, they devolved to service to self, began consciously regressing themselves because of the way they were viewing this. They were going, maybe this is unbelievable. And first of all, some of them were intimidated by us and our capacities and our dynamic, uncontrolled, but self-responsible co-creation capacities. They were intimidated by that. And they were intimidated by that because they were coming more from a service to self perspective. And what I mean by that, the consciousness regressive perspective, because of where they're coming from, they assume that humans here were, and we were, capable, and they saw how our original creators had gone bye-bye. It's like, well, they could be that irresponsible to leave others in charge. Then their creations could be just as irresponsible. And gee, things could really get chaotic here because they know that everything that's done in every reality, every thought, emotion, and in some realities there aren't emotions per se, but thoughts and behaviors ripple throughout consciousness, throughout all realities, throughout all densities, throughout all dimensions. And they didn't like that possibility. But they were coming at it from a consciousness regressive perspective, meaning that they decided rather than to work with us, to sit down and look at this potential and say, hey, what can we do to make sure that that responsibility is always a part of this? What can we do together? They decided their perspective was to control it. And by then they knew enough about us and how we operated. They had access to everything. The key to the cookie jar, so they knew, and they had watched and observed. They understood deeply, not only our psychology, the way we thought, the way we feel and our emotions and all that. They understood our genetics. And when you understand, you have that kind of understanding. Remember, these are higher density beings. Very mind focused as opposed to heart centered. And I'm not talking about the physical heart. I'm talking about the capacity for real love, true caring, service to others. Consciousness comes forth from that area, from our energy center that was built into us. Built in. All right? But they don't really dig that. They're more mental. In our reality, it's called left brain. I'll get into that too. And so our original full human mind-body complex in its more fluid, non-dense, or less dense, far less dense, more fluid, not hard. In other words, we had the capacity to alter our appearance. It was so fluid. Remember, we could alter our own genetics, our own appearance, our own, and expand or contract our energies as appropriate to conscious, progressive creation, consciousness progressive creative creation and co-creation. And we worked in harmony with each other and this reality, but very fluid, very. And when it came to sex, sexuality as we know it today was not. There were no reproductive organs or a sexual system in this mind-body complex. And a lot of you are going to flip it hearing that. But this idea of separate sexness, we embodied, truly embodied, not just the concept, but masculine, feminine principle. We created life. We did not give birth as a result of sex. Why would we have needed reproductive organs when we had the capacity to create plant life? We had created these forms. We could shift these forms. There was no need for creating more of ourselves. Not in the way that people view it today. Not the way it's seen today. So knowing all this about us and their high-level technological capacities that these other races had, I would dare say that was one of the earliest, in hand with one other modification that was made probably about the same time, because they go hand in hand. One of the earliest DNA and or human template alterations that were made was to genetically splice us with the mammals that we had created. We became the human mammals. Manimals. Compare us to the mammals of today. We have so much in common, which was why it was so easy to introduce and promulgate the notion. You know, what do people always say? Well, we're just humans. We're animals. Oh, look, they're animals. We're just a different form of animal. Well, we were not any form of animal in our original state. And I'm not knocking animals. That is not a debasement of animals, but that's just not what we were. So mammal genetics, and God knows how many experiments that went on and how many are still going on. And there's fact-based experimentation going on now. Spiders, look at the internet, the stuff that we can see. Imagine what's going on behind the scenes, but mixing our human genetics with spiders and such, well, this went on way back when. This is why we see all these statues of half animal, half human, minotaurs and things like that. I mean, it happened, people. Myth doesn't mean fairy tale. Myth is lore. Lore doesn't mean fairy tale either. They both mean narrative of what's going on, what was going on. It's a narrative. But that's another word that's been hijacked. This is why language is so frustrating to me and so limiting. Because you decide you want to hijack the use of a word, just start putting out these different meanings. Long enough and hard enough, people take the meaning of the word changes. The original meaning of the word changes. And most people today don't have a clue. When they say mythological, they're thinking they're talking about fairy tales or just made up stories by a bunch of ignorant people in the past. Well, humans weren't ignorant at all. We were highly advanced, highly consciousness potential, vital energy source, technologically advanced beyond anything that these other races and civilizations are introducing today or working with behind the scenes. Even their highest technologies don't hold a candle to our true inbuilt capacities and higher order, highest order technologies. Okay? So, mixing us, whether it was predominantly, that's why it was so easy to bring in the notion not that long ago that we evolved from animals, from apes. And again, this isn't knocking the ape species at all. They're beautiful, incredibly intelligent expressions and creations. But we are not mammals. We were not in our original form. We created mammals. We were not them. And so they built in their genetic tampering, it was a perfect form of separating us from ourselves. They understood, they know about the masculine feminine principle that's inherent in all of consciousness throughout reality in every form, whether you are in a male body or a female body. Both principles are inherent and work through you. But if you're not conscious of that, then either one principle or the other can be honed and focused and built out of distortion, out of proportion to the other. So what a perfect way to separate ourselves from ourselves. And part of that process involved the splitting of the brain through genetic manipulations. There is no other mammal or creature that has anything close to being considered a brain wherein the brain is split. They also deactivated various of our inbuilt original genetics and added their own during the course of this whole process. They've been tampering with that all along. But splitting the brain so we no longer had ready access to true holistic beingness, where the characteristic of left brain, logic, linear thinking, the beauty of that, were perfectly balanced and both accessible simultaneously. The energies of creativity, caring, intuition. Now add to the mix the literal separation from a physical standpoint of the human into male and female physical entities. And frankly, you have to give them credit. What a brilliant plan to regress us, to keep us suppressed and certainly regress us. And add to the mix all of the pleasurable physical sensations around sex as we know it today. they all were also wise enough, clever enough, not wise, but highly, these intellectual, these minds focused on technologies and control, and we are gods. They were so jealous of us, they preferred to present themselves as gods to us after a certain point. But to control us in that way, they knew that our creational energy center was in the stomach and pelvic area. That's our creational center of energy. That's where intuition, deep intuition, inner knowing. In fact, scientists today have proven that there are probably more neurotransmitters created and sent out from the pelvic center, the creational center, than the brain, the mind center. The mind center. And so where do they place the reproductive organs? Right next to that area. So that procreation is easily confused with true creation. They're different things. Procreation is a form of creation, but it has nothing to do with the original mind-body complex construction and makeup. Now, did we have some form of sex? Some form of, because sex, intercourse between two awakening travelers. Now, I'll get back to that in a minute, okay? I'll come back because it's important. To put the reproductive system in both the male and female body so close to the creational center would be a brilliant way to manipulate our thoughts and emotions, which create and alter our genetics. Right there, right beside each other. And to ultimately, over a period of time where we were regressing, to totally confuse the two, to mistake one for the other, until we totally think that sex is creation, the process of creation. And to keep us, along with all this conditioning and engineering that's going on, to debase sex. Initially, the public front was to say sex is bad, da, 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 da. But on the other hand, what does that do to the regressed human consciousness? Forbidden fruit. What's all this sex talk about? I want to know about sex. It's like, wow. Why would I want to avoid this? Even though the churches tell me to, that this is bad. How can this be bad? Because it feels so good. And I know here I'm oversimplifying. So forgive me that. Otherwise, this could go on forever. But, so keep that in mind. Now, no matter how, this is important for you conscious journey of awakening travelers to really get this. That no matter where you are right now and what you're experiencing and what's going on around you, however dark its origins might be, or however dark it appears to you right now, it is always, without exception, to understand this, that is always, without exception, a means of progressing. And all you have to do is step back and allow yourself to see it. It's not, unless you allow it to hold you back. And only you can allow it to hold. You're the one, if something is holding you back, if something's holding me back, it's up to me to figure out in what way it's holding me back. How I'm holding myself back. Or how I'm holding myself back. By not seeing, remember the balancing. Consciousness balancing act. The more consciously regressive something is, the more the opportunity for it to become consciousness progressive. It's about mastering our capacities to be able to get back to seeing that. And so, let's take that into the real world. What does that mean around sexuality? And how we should be in sexuality? First and foremost, we have to accept what is and work with what is. And we are mind-body complexes that have sexual and reproductive organs that sometimes put out energies that cause us to have urges and desires. And that's one of the other things that, going back to the last video, they manipulate us, and I spoke to earlier in this video. Those energies, sexual energies, can be tweaked and triggered and amplified, particularly by those who have addictions, because those are the biggest, baddest distortions that we carry within us. They leave not just hooks, but open doors and gateways into ourselves, and open ourselves to the most extreme types of manipulation and possessions and being hosts for these entities and their agendas. And in past video, I don't remember which, but I spoke to how, maybe just maybe the last video, but how even though some of these entities do not want to be or cannot be physical in the same way we are, because they're not compatible with this reality, the consciousness and all, but others don't want to be, because they do not want to regress their own genetics by becoming physical in third density. They do not want to risk losing their higher density genetics, even though they're regressive, because they know that they put themselves at risk in doing so. And they've seen it happen in their futures, where when they became regressed enough, that's why they're doing so many of the things they are now. They're trying to clean up their own messes at our expense. Even the so-called benevolent beings that sometimes channel through people, this is what they're about. They know that they've messed up in their futures, and they're the ones that are coming back from the future that are saying that they are something that they're not, because they're trying to fix things for themselves. They don't care how it might devastate us. We've become sort of the perfect example. Those of you out there who are still, and there is no judgment here, but something for you to think about. How can these other races and civilizations have any respect for us at all if we don't respect each other and we kill each other at the drop of a hat? We're killing animals to eat them, to consume their energy. why should these races and entities think of us any differently and treat us any differently than we do each other and other forms of life on this planet? As above, so below. As below, so above. And you can say, you know, if you're still blaming these other entities for the state of our affairs, then you really need to go back and really re-listen to some of these videos, read some of the articles on my site, or it's not time for you, or you weren't meant to be on the conscious journey of awakening. And I'm not saying that I know everything. I don't mean that at all. But there are certain basic truths that are not my truth. They're not your truths. They're not anybody's. They are the truth. And I'm not talking about some of the specifics of my theory today. I want it to stretch you and for you to tune into your own inner knowing and common sense before you ingest what I'm saying today. So, how do we go about working with what is? Coming back around to that. Okay, we have these bodies. We're having these urges. How are we supposed to be truly accepting of that and understand that there can be, particularly for men, there can be some physical ramifications of not having sex? And that's what I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about just as detrimental and destructive to our consciousness as it is to live a life that's based in sex and you're obsessed with sex and everything to do with sex, whether or not you're able to actually act on it, but everything about it, or on a regular basis, except with maybe yourself. Maybe you're not a predator per se, but you're obsessed. On the opposite end of that spectrum, how could it be appropriate for where we are right now to just abstain completely? That doesn't make sense either. So right now I'm going to talk a little bit about what sex can be. And that sex is not something to be thrown around and offered up to anybody. Whether you say, oh, well, I'm doing it, I don't really want to do it, but I'm doing it because the other person wants me to, and it'll keep them from being upset with me or angry with me. That is not healthy sex at all. It's service to self. Even when you say that you're doing it for the other person, that is service to self, because on some level, you're getting something out of it. Maybe that means, okay, you're evading a potential burst of anger from the other person, or nagging from the other person, or whatever. But that's service to self. That is not consciousness progressive consciousness. That is not service to others. That's service to self. So that can't be a healthy thing. That's not going to move you along your path any more than it is healthy sex to push and nag and goad the other person into having it. Service to self. It's all about you and what your body wants and what you think, what your mind is telling you. Service to self. Whether you're in a relationship with someone, casual or serious, these are both transgressions. Or transgressions. And they keep you stuck in low-level consciousness, regressive consciousness. And the people I'm speaking to here, once again, are those that are serious about it. They know they're on a conscious journey of awakening. And they're serious about moving forward. And yes, it involves hard decisions. What else is new? If if you've been on this journey any time at all, and you are committed to it, and you have this deep desire, it's all about tough decisions. All the time. From moment to moment, making a choice. Consciousness progressive, consciousness regressive. Service to self, service to others. From one moment, from one decision to the next. Okay? So now back to how do we deal with this now? So, we know it's not all about frenetic, obsession with sex, but it's also not necessarily about abstinence. So what's the middle ground here? What's a healthy middle ground that we can be in now and still keep moving forward in our journey? Which takes me to begin with, intention. When we have a sexual urge, if we can be fully present when that urge arises and be honest with ourselves, honest enough, and this is hard work. There's no getting around it. To look at ourselves, whether or not you believe any of my theories around this, but I'm talking about now in this day-to-day life for what is, however it came to be, to approach sex in a consciousness progressive manner of being. So when you have a sexual urge, get present with it. Do your best to determine. I know some, particularly men, are going to say it's purely physical. I'll get to that in a minute. But ask yourself, first of all, where's this urge coming from? Is this an egoic? Is this ego? Is this habit? I'm just so used to it. I want my sex. Is there anything about the urge beyond sexual gratification, physical gratification? Is there anything about it that you can see that is anything more than just physical gratification? Ask yourself that. And again, that's not a judgment. You're gathering information about what's going on within you. It's not about judging. I'm not judging, and you don't need to be judging yourself. But what do you think is the true source of that urge? First of all, is it your own? Is it possible that you could be being messed with by external forces? We have to look at these things. Why do I have this urge? Where is this urge coming from? See if you can nail that down. All right? That's the first step. Or I should say, that is a way of addressing it. And now I'm going to get to another way, and then I'll come back. I know it seems a little convoluted, but bear with me. Another approach, another way of beginning to address this is remembering that, okay, this is the way this is, but how can I uplift, and see the sexual act and use that energy in a higher order consciousness way. True creation. Remember, it's right there by your creational center. and perhaps find ways to transmute that energy, to breathe, just breathe through your feelings and say, I intend to use this energy towards responsible creation, responsible expression. And I'm aligning with core self so that core self and inner knowing can help me find ways to do that. So that's one way. Now, getting back to physical. I am not suggesting that you stop physical gratification, but do it with clear intention. Whether you achieve that gratification with another or with yourself. Particularly, we'll begin with yourself. Set in yourself, speak, and align with a clear intention that you are choosing to satisfy this urge with the intention of relieving bodily stress, and so that you can make it more so that you have more ready access to less physical stress around getting in touch with core self and anything that might interfere with that. But experiment with different intentions around gratification and mean it, because they won't, intentions are of no value if they aren't sincere and they aren't aligned with core self. And in this case, I'm speaking to intentions around how you can come, remember, we're learning to master all of our capacities and energies. And sexual energy is on the list, folks. It's there. And that's part of what we need to master. And these are just first steps to learning to do that. Because although the reasons behind giving us these physical features and these urges that they're always working at us to elicit from us, we can use that to progress on our journeys. And it's not easy. It's not. If you have any sense of physicality at all, and a lot of us are very physically oriented just by our unique makeup in this mind-body complex at this time. And it's not easy. But work with intention around it, particularly when it involves, or not just particularly, but start with intention around self-gratification. And see if you can align that with the intention of helping you, and I don't want to say heal yourself because it's not a sickness, but it is a disorder. It is not natural to the original human form. And I know that's hard for some of you to hear. And if you're not ready to hear this, say bye-bye. This lady's crazy, whatever. Fine by me. But I'm here to help you stretch and grow and regain and clear yourself. You're not becoming anything. You already are. You're just clearing crap out of the way so that you can more and more come into that. So there's nothing to fix. We're just cleaning up, cleaning up, cleaning up. Okay, so work with intention. And if you are in a relationship with someone, same thing. Check in with yourself when you have an urge to be with the other person and see, is this ego or is this purely bodily? Do I really care about satisfying the other person beyond the fact that maybe it excites me and helps me feel more satisfied? Is this urge coming from a place of true caring or purely self-gratification? No judgment. Do not judge yourself ever in this. Just observe. Observe. And then do your best to create and align with intentions that help you progress on your journey. Whether that be with the intention of opening up more to your true creational capacities, or through learning to work with this energy as it arises in you and transmute it and let that propel your creational capacities, or to go ahead and act on it and look for and align with ways with the intention of using it to facilitate your higher order creational capacities. I'm going to say this again. This is in no way about denying the fact that you have these organs and these sensations come up within you. They're there. They're there. And then also acknowledging that sometimes, and I've had this happen to me, where entities mess with you and your sexual energies. Getting back to, this ties in with the last commentary, how even though these entities, some of them do not want to be here, they want to experience physicality. And guess what? Sex, as it is now, through these organs, lets them experience things that they cannot experience in their own realities. And they have some pretty base level thoughts around it and intentions around sex. And so they created these features in us for that reason as well. Something to think about. So be good to yourself in this process. No judgment. Do not judge yourself. But take a look at, like I said, try to identify if the urge, first of all, is your own, or if something something external is pushing it, triggering it. And if it is your own, how can you use this energy in that moment? What is the best use of that energy to help you progress on your journey? And sometimes it is about release of energy. But be careful when it comes to involving another person, because that, more than anything, is when we can fall into consciousness, regressive consciousness, when it involves another person and we're coming at it from a purely service to self perspective. So just become more aware, more present, more mindful, and more respectful of the energies of your mind-body complex and what it really means to regain self-mastery of them. Okay? All right. In the and I'll be talking more about this too, but just breathe. This was not an easy video. Not an easy video to make either. And I know it's not been easy to hear, but coming into some of these realizations and understandings and inner knowings isn't always easy. It isn't easy for me either. But my intention is always to help you expand, to help you stretch and grow, to consider things outside your normal realm of knowledge, to stretch and start looking at, because how else are we going to expand into higher order understandings if we keep ourselves confined within these basic thoughts and understandings, the ideas of others? Start stretching into your own. Step into your own, really. And how I do this is something I do every day. I show people how to do this all the time, but quickly, just always am connected. I'm always tuned into core self before I begin this intentional process. Asking questions. Asking myself questions. And trusting that I have the answers and that things will start coming to me. And they always do. And I run them past my own inner knowing just to make sure that nothing else is interfering, that including ego, and certainly nothing external, and just let them percolate, so to speak, even before I own them myself. So that's basically it. And you can do the same thing and more. I mean, there's so many more things you can do to have access to and make sure that you're growing and stretching all the time. And a good example of that is, and I'll tell you right now that as I move through this process, and you could well experience this if you're coming along with me and you stay with me, you will see over a period of time how certain understandings, and I'll tell you, have evolved and changed. And I have no problem saying I was wrong, or I didn't see a big enough picture, or I misunderstood. Because I'm growing and changing with this process, just like you. And I'm also, when I don't know, I have no problem saying, I don't know. And I've said that in a number of occasions here in these videos. When I don't know how something, when I haven't regained access to that knowledge, I'll say, I don't know. I don't know. And that's okay too. So if you've been following various people that you trust and they've been giving you good information, that's fantastic. They're same thing with me. There are certain people that I follow and read and watch their videos and all. But pay attention. If you've been following someone for some length of time now, and they're still talking about the same stuff they were talking about, say, 5 years ago, 2 years ago, that everything is still kind of the same. There's not really been anything new or different. Then just ask yourself, is this person progressing? Are they really doing the work? Or are they kind of sticking with these same things because now they've built a living around it? And again, there's no judgment here. I want you to get the greatest return on your investments of time and attention. Your energy investments. And for those that have the burning desire to keep progressing on the journey, those are your precious commodities. Those are the things that keep you going on this journey and keep you progressing on this journey. Is your investments, or not progressing, is what you're investing your time and attention in. That's it. Okay, so in the next video, I'm going to be getting into, I talk a lot about higher order technologies and uh, things like that. And today I touched on sexuality and how that was something that was, from my understanding at this point in my journey, including the left brain, right brain split, they worked hand in hand, separating us from ourselves, literally, and the human sex organs and reproductive system as we know them now. That's technology. Okay, and there's been various other technologies throughout our genetic manipulation history and the manipulation of our reality. And I want to talk about some of those and how some of them were maybe initially intended for good. They served a legitimate consciousness progressive purpose, but they've been twisted into something else. Or maybe they weren't part of the original deal, like the human reproductive system, and they never were intended for something good, but can be used to get there. Because remember, sexual energy is just a lesser form of creative energy. And when two people that are on this journey consciously come together and use sex intentionally as a tool to expand their awareness, their understanding of reality, and true creative, responsible creation, nothing compares. So that's a consciousness progressive use of sexuality as it is. It can be turned to something beautiful. And when we hearken back to our original full human purpose, to be here in this reality, which is to create responsibly toward the progression of consciousness. All right, and on that note, I'm going to call it a wrap, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.